Hello! You may recall last year I started my film festival journey with a huge bang by attending the Toronto International Film Festival, and I shared my experience with all of you here. Over 5 days, I saw 12 movies and had some incredible experiences, like seeing all of Talking Heads, because I happened to be in the right place at the right time. I had such a great experience last year that I decided to return to TIFF for 2024, and with all the knowledge I gathered last year, I decided to do things a little bit differently this time. Instead of attending the first 5 days of the festival, I arrived on the 4th and stayed for the last day, so that's 8 days of the festival. I wanted to spread out my timeline a bit so I wasn't packing like 3 movies into a day, which was exhausting. And I also wanted time to explore the beautiful city of Toronto, because I barely had any time to last year. Over the festival, I saw 12 films, same as last year, and I will share those films with you now. So yeah, I arrived in Toronto on Sunday the 8th, and I spent most of the day resting because I took an overnight flight. But after all my resting, it was time for my first screening of the festival, a film called All of You, directed by William Bridges. All of You is a semi-sci-fi, but more of a romantic drama set in the near future about fate and soulmates and the choices we make in life. If I were to recommend this to someone, I would say it's kind of comparable to Past Lives, but where Past Lives focuses on 3 brief periods of time, each scene in All of You is a jump in time, which is so effectively paced that it's honestly devastating. You feel the passage of time so strongly in the film, and that, along with all the choices the characters make, just gives you this horrible feeling of not being in control. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and you mourn with these characters for what could have been. I really liked that the sci-fi and futuristic elements were kind of more a backdrop for the film, and the real focus is just this beautiful story of these characters and their lives. I'm already a huge fan of Brett Goldstein as a writer, but I was equally impressed with his acting chops here. And he's not bad in Ted Lasso or Super Bob, but what he's doing here is just really something special, and Imogen Poots opposite him is equally fantastic. So yeah, I highly recommend checking this out when it gets released, and also check out Brett Goldstein's podcast while I'm at it, Films to be Buried With. It's probably my favorite podcast. Then many hours later, it was time for my next film, for Midnight Madness. My main goal after last year was to attend more midnight screenings, as for sure the greatest theater experience of my TIFF last year was Hell of a Summer, and I was so excited to have that experience again with the world premiere of Friendship, directed by Andrew DeYoung. This was one of my most anticipated movies of the festival, as I'm a huge Tim Robinson fan, and it was kind of a miracle that I got to see this. It was kind of the hottest ticket of the festival, well, maybe besides Enora. And I'll tell you my thoughts on the movie, but first, I want to talk about the night in general, because it was like the craziest and most star-studded experience of the fest for me. So, I got to the theater, I sat down in my seat, and 2 rows ahead of me is a familiar face. That face is Canadian legend and overall cool guy and director Jason Reitman, which already would have been like the highlight of the festival for me. Then someone sits down next to me, I briefly glance over, and I realize it is director Jane Schonbrun, who made I Saw the TV Glow and We're All Going to the World's Fair. So that was also really cool. But then, Paul Rudd, star of the film, walks in. He talks to Jason Reitman for a minute, and then he walks down the aisle and ends up sitting 3 seats to my left. And he's so close to me that for the entire film I can see his foot bouncing in my periphery. What was funniest about this, though, was my incredibly nonchalant reaction during this. I don't know if I was just really tired from my flight, or I just don't get that starstruck anymore, but what was going through my head in the moment was, yep, that's Paul. That's him. You know, it's nice to see him. Like I knew him. I don't know. Anyway, that was my big celebrity encounter of the festival. Time for my thoughts on Friendship. If I were to describe Friendship to someone, it would be like if I Love You Man was also the cable guy, but also an I Think You Should Leave sketch, shot like Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master, with a little bit of like Looney Tunes. I don't know, it's kind of just one of those things you have to see for yourself. So it's about this guy who feels a little bit disconnected from his family and his work colleagues. So he befriends his new neighbor, a weatherman who's very welcoming and charismatic. And, you know, basically if you've seen any Tim Robinson bit, I don't have to explain further. Both Rudd and Robinson start off equally goofy, but as the movie plays out, Paul Rudd's character gets a little more grounded, while Robinson just goes completely off the rails. And I think that is so effective for the story and putting you in the mind of Tim Robinson's character. Yeah, Robinson, he nails it in this role. He's generally believable as a normal-ish, but a bit socially inept guy, but he gets the opportunity a couple times in the film to go full Robinson. And that balance I found to be honestly kind of refreshing compared to stuff like I Think You Should Leave, where it's just foot on the gas the entire time. I also thought Jack Dylan Grazer was a highlight. He's so subtle, but he's really able to hold his own against a comedy giant like Tim Robinson, and he pushes this thing over the edge for me. Speaking of pushing things over the edge, there is an incredible cameo from Connor O'Malley in this film, and I haven't stopped thinking about it. Between the performances and the visual style of this thing, which is full of these long dissolves and these almost cartoonish transitions, it's really one of the most unique comedies I've ever seen. For day 2, I saw Riff Raff, directed by Dito Montiel. I figured this would be entertaining regardless of quality, just based on the cast, which it definitely was. You get to see some comedy giants do their thing, and Lewis Pullman play against type as a hot criminal character, but it's just painfully mediocre in every other aspect. It heavily uses flashbacks, which I think some people will be into, but for me, I just don't think the story is strong enough to support that format. I think it's trying to be to mobster movies what Knives Out was to whodunits, but it just doesn't have it. I'm sorry. It's a very average, crowd-pleasy, dark comedy, which will be right at home on any streaming service, and it will be your grandma's favorite movie of the year. Okay, despite my many issues with Riff Raff, I think it was worth it to see it, as I got to be in the presence of Bill Murray, who, from comedy to Wes Anderson, is, like, my biggest hero. So I have to admit, I got a little bit emotional, which gives this movie a slight edge. Now, if you only know me from YouTube, you might not know this, but me and my brother are massive fans of 70s SNL, so it was my mission to get to go to the premiere of Jason Reitman's Saturday Night. And with my incredible luck, I was able to make that happen. It was truly one of the most exciting experiences of my life, and I felt so lucky to be in that room and to see that insanely huge cast in person, and I genuinely thought I would pass out from being in the presence of the Rachel Sennett. So without further ado, here are my thoughts on Saturday Night. I originally feared that I may have overhyped this film into oblivion, but I'm happy to report that it was really everything I dreamed it being. This thing is so precise and smooth, and Reitman pulls off an incredible feat of directing with this controlled chaos. It's kind of one of the most gorgeous looking movies ever. The 16mm film is so rough and rich, and it gives everything this grainy glow that I think fits so well with all the handheld stuff. And as far as the camera work is concerned, this movie has some of the most impressive one-takes I have ever seen. It really felt like I was there observing something real for the entire runtime, so much so that when the movie was at a clear end, I really felt like I was just gonna keep watching this story unfold forever, which is also a testament to the pacing of this film. When it comes to the performances, there really isn't a weak link here. My personal standouts would include Tommy Dewey as Michael O'Donoghue, Corey Michael Smith as Chevy Chase, and Dylan O'Brien as Dan Aykroyd, who is truly fantastic here. And between this and his brief appearance on Phantasmas earlier this year, Dylan O'Brien has gained a fan in me. If I had a single nitpick about Saturday Night, it would be that everything gets wrapped up very quickly and conveniently in the end, which comes off as a bit cheesy and rushed in my opinion. But that's really grasping at straws, because if you can't tell, I adore this film. Yeah, I have so many thoughts on Saturday Night, but I'll hold off for now as I will for sure be talking about it more at length in a later video. But yeah, best movie of the year so far. Then I saw Sad Jokes, a German film directed by Fabian Stumm about a filmmaker working on his next film while co-parenting his young son and also trying to move on from the breakup with his ex-boyfriend. I kind of went into this blind, so I didn't really have any expectations from the start, but this was a really pleasant surprise regardless. I loved the dry humor in this film. I mean, that's a given. The film's called Sad Jokes, but it just felt so naturalistic, and it really complemented the more earnest and emotional beats of the film as well. I love films about filmmaking, and this is a great addition to that category. It's full of heart, it was an incredibly delightful watch, and I'm super glad I caught this one. Day 4 started with Matt and Mara, directed by Kazik Radwanski. This was one of my most anticipated for not only the festival, but the whole year, as director Kazik Radwanski's previous film, Anne at 13,000 Feet, completely destroyed me. And I will say, I liked some of this. Matt and Mara has a lot of the elements of Kazik's work that I really love, and I thought the story was very compelling. However, I wish that the camera work was a bit more like Kazik's previous movies, as I thought that these kind of static wide shots made the movie look a lot more average. I also felt like this was a little too trimmed down. Though this is his longest film at 80 minutes, I really felt like I needed more time with these two characters together. The standout scenes and what I loved most about this film were the scenes where everything felt a lot less staged and more improvised, like them just walking down Yonge Street and talking, or them getting the passport photos. Dara is one of my favorite actresses. She tends to play these very sensitive and neurotic characters, which I find myself relating to a lot. And Matt's dramatic acting here is so surprising and touching, as I'm not used to seeing him attempt such earnestness. Later that night, I went and watched Ghostbusters in the park, which was very fun. It felt like a great way to celebrate my Bill Murray seeing and Saturday night viewing. Then it was time for my second Midnight Madness screening, The Gesui Doza, directed by Kenichi Yugana. I never heard of Kenichi Yugana prior to seeing this, but after seeing the trailer for The Gesui Doza, I knew I had to see it. If you know me, you know a small movie about a punk band from a cult status filmmaker is like my dream movie. The Gesui Doza follows a punk band, who the film is titled after, who are heavily inspired by horror films, and their attempt to write their big hit while living and working on a farm in the Japanese countryside. It's a silly and breezy film, very absurdist in its humor, but also deals with the grueling process of making something, as well as legacy and meaning, which ends up making this a lot more touching, relatable, and emotional than I ever expected. Yeah, there's a scene at the end of the film of the band celebrating the main character's birthday, and yeah, it was very moving for me. The original songs are fun, very in line with the music from Scott Pilgrim. I got a free CD at the screening that features a song from the film. One small issue that I had, though, was the movie starts out kind of like a mockumentary, but that aspect is quickly abandoned, which was a little confusing. but that's really the only negative I have. Seeing such a small scale film that's so hyper stylized be so effective, especially a film about making art, it really infected me with the filmmaking bug, and I just wanted to run out of that theater and make my own Gesuidos. Again, I wasn't familiar with Kenichi prior to seeing this, but I'm really looking forward to watching the rest of his work. Day 5 started with The Mountain, directed by Rachel House. The Mountain is a beautiful film about Maori culture and preserving Maori culture and traditions in younger generations. It follows 3 children attempting a journey to the top of Mount Taranaki and the bond that grows as they are on this journey. I love Rachel House's work as an actor, so I was really looking forward to seeing her first directorial feature, and I knew this story would be in good hands with her, since in addition to acting opposite some fantastic young actors, she's also been an acting coach for said actors on multiple movies like Boy and Jojo Rabbit. Yeah, the performances from these young actors are really fantastic, but again, no surprise there with House's previous work. Maybe this is a grand generalization, but I find with so much New Zealand cinema, there is so much joy and humor and charm, regardless of how heavy the subject is. And The Mountain is a perfect example of that. This was one of the biggest highlights of the fest for me, and I can't wait to see what Rachel House does next. Then I saw The Luckiest Man in America, directed by Samir Oliveros. Luckiest Man is the true story of a man who found a weakness in a game show pattern, memorized it, and used it to his advantage, basically winning endless cash as long as he played. Executives catch on to this and have to decide how to proceed. It's a small, harmless, comedic thriller, one of those obscure, you know, this really happened movies. The film kind of dons the aesthetic of an 80s TV game show, which I thought was pretty cool, but story-wise is pretty one-note and feels surprisingly repetitive at points for a 90-minute movie. I was drawn in by a lot of the names on the cast list, but felt like they were not used to their full potential, especially Patty Harrison, who barely gets to use her comedic genius at all here. However, there is one exception to this critique, and that is Walton Goggins as the game show host. It's the role he was born to play. Bring back Baby Billy's Bible Bonkers. For day 6, I saw Oh Canada, the new film from Paul Schrader. This is a film about art, legacy, and getting older. No doubt a very personal film for Schrader. I was interested in this concept, and I understand what it was trying to achieve, but it just felt like it was going for so many different things and ended up being very lackluster. I found it to be way too all over the place, which I guess is kind of the point, since this is a story told by someone who isn't really all there at this point. But I just don't like to watch something so incoherent, and it really wasn't fighting to keep my attention. Some people really like this, some people don't. Yeah, in the end, it's probably my least favorite from the fest. For day 7, I last minute decided to see Nutcrackers. Nutcrackers is the latest from Halloween reboot and Pineapple Express director David Gordon Green, except instead of Michael Myers, it is a holiday-ish dramedy with Ben Stiller. I wasn't really sure what to expect, as people were pretty lukewarm on this early on in the fest, but I enjoyed myself. I think the cinematography is very nice, Ben Stiller does his thing, and I love the idea of these 4 real-life brothers acting together, and they were all phenomenal. I understand the mixed reviews. It's really nothing profound, but I don't think it has to be. It's a quaint little crowd pleaser, and I'm satisfied with that. And the Danny McBride and Jody Hill producer credits don't hurt this thing. I don't know, maybe it's because I felt a bit of a personal connection to the film as well. I was also a long-haired farm kid who was homeschooled, so yeah, I saw a lot of myself and my upbringing in these 4 brothers. To me, Nutcrackers is The Holdovers meets We Bought a Zoo. I guess it got bought by Hulu, so yeah, perfectly acceptable indie flick coming to your TVs soon. For For day 8, I had my final film of the festival, the People's Choice Award screening of The Life of Chuck, directed by Mike Flanagan. The Life of Chuck is an adaptation of a Stephen King story of the same title about the life of a man told in reverse, starting at his untimely death at 39 and ending with his childhood. It covers themes of existentialism and the paths you create and go down in life. It's a very personal and uplifting film, but I don't think I found it as profound as others did. It teeters more on cheesy for me. I also have issues with it aesthetics-wise, as I don't think the movie's that visually interesting. It did have its moments for me though. I thought the script was pretty fantastic, I like the structure of the film, and the events of Act 1, or Act 3 I guess, really hooked me in for the rest of the ride. I know it's based on a Stephen King story of the same structure, but the translation of this reversed 3-act story was executed so well, I think. I'm a little surprised it won People's Choice, cause it's a little bit more unconventional compared to some other recent winners, but I get why people really resonated with Life of Chuck, and let's just say those TikTok compilation edits of dancing in film will never be the same. And that was my TIFF 2024. I know this video was a bit different than last year's, more review-based rather than vlogging stuff, but hopefully you enjoyed it nonetheless. If you were at the fest, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these movies if you saw them, or just your favorites from the fest in general. If for whatever reason you liked hearing my thoughts on movies, you can follow my Letterboxd at Stella Perry. I sometimes write more than a one-liner. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.